The ancestors of the Belmont family are doomed to confront the power of evil incarnate Dracula. In 1917, a catalyst sought to revive the long-dead spirit of the vampire. Her name was Elizabeth Bodley. To revive him, she needed to travel all over Europe, enlisting help from all the powers of darkness. Two young vampire hunters set out to fulfill their destiny, push back the evil hordes, and drive the vampire back into his dark netherworld. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Ray the Flying Squirrel here, and I am from the likes of the Mexi Toys videos once again, and here we are on to, presumably speaking, the last Castlevania game we're about to do for the sake of the films of this year in 2023, before we get on to the next batch of those Castlevania games until next year in 2024. So as a result, here we are on to Castlevania Bloodlines. First came out in 1994, for the Sega Mega Drive / Sega Genesis. Now, for those of you who don't know, is that this game was also known as Vampire Killer for the Japanese version, whilst in the European version does somehow also has a different name, which as a result it's called Castlevania: A New Generation, which I'll explain more details about the forms of some differences between the European PAL version compared to the NTSC Genesis version. So because of that, the version I'm going to be playing on is of course Castlevania Bloodlines, just because, well, I can totally see blood, so the title makes sense. So because of that, yeah, let's just go ahead and get this game started, shall we? So, yeah, relatively speaking, it was about the fact that this game came out the same year as when Sonic the Hedgehog 3 came out, alongside with Sonic & Knuckles as well. So yeah, it's pretty cool with the films of 1994 in mind. So because of that, yeah, let's go and get started. So right from the get-go, you're able to actually choose between two different characters, which are John Morris, that behaves exactly like the films of how he does it for Simon Belmont, as well as Eric Locard, which as a result, both characters do have their different weapons. Likely, for instance, we're going to be doing with John Morris, as you can tell, and then basically he does manage to able to equip himself the Vampire Killer, which as a result, think of like the actual trusty whip from the likes of Simon Belmont or Trevor Belmont, except the noticeable difference being is that it's basically a different name for it, I guess. So, but either way, let's get started with Castlevania Bloodlines. So as a result, if you couldn't tell already, I'm actually going to be doing two playthroughs of the game. So for instance, on the first playthrough, I'm going to be going through the entire game as John Morris, but eventually at some point until tomorrow, I will able to actually play as Eric Locard, which as a result, just to show you guys some different variety when it comes to two different gameplay styles with these two different playable characters. So because of that, here we are in Castlevania Bloodlines. So as a result, if you ever played any other Castlevania games before, you feel right at home. Except there are some noticeable differences this time around, is that as you can tell, there's no time limits this time around. So because of that, you can freely able to actually explore certain stages without any sort of like hesitation, or to be more specifically, no need to able to actually just try to able to rush through this, because as a result, relatively speaking, though, is about the fact that, well, if you couldn't tell, you still need to able to actually try to able to upgrade your whip upgrades or anything else like that, just in case you'll become a lot more stronger and stuff like that. But relatively speaking, though, is about the fact that everything else will be pretty much self-explanatory if you're those who ever played the previous games, except the notable differences being is that obviously that well, if you couldn't tell already, is that rather than collecting hearts as your enemy mission, so instead you're able to collect those gems, which is essentially this game's equivalent to hearts, which as a result, certain sub-weapons do make a return in this game, so there's no stopwatch unfortunately, but regardless of everything else though, you're still able to actually access to the axe, alongside with the form system, any other items as well, including the actual boomerang, if you couldn't tell, as we're going to be currently equipping. So because of that, and much like the forms of how it does on Super Castlevania 4, is that certain bosses do now usually appear in a mid-stage. So because of that, and relatively speaking though, ultimately though, this game does have 6 stages, just like the original Castlevania, and they're all incredibly long, with all these different buttons of challenges and enemy encounters, and holy Christ! Jeez, that is gruesome. I mean, what's this game rated? GA General Audience? Dang, we're getting hardcore in the 90s for this point. So yeah, relatively speaking, since we're gonna be playing Castlevania Bloodlines, yeah, the game is actually pretty graphic. I'm guessing because they are able to actually do the forms of the blood policy. Kinda like how he did the forms of how it does it, they keep the actual, violence left intact in during the forms of the Mega Drive version or the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat. So as a result, compared to the forms of how it does it in Castlevania A New Generation, all the actual blood has been censored, so yeah, I'm not exactly sure what certain alterations they do have exactly, but luckily though, I still managed able to have myself Castlevania A New Generation thanks to the forms of the Mega Drive Mini that I still have. Although, getting the actual physical cartridge version of the game is actually going to get ridiculously pricey, much like the forms of how it does it on Mega Man The Wily Wars. I'm not exactly sure what's up with the forms of certain old school video games cost a lot more these days, which I know for a fact that because they are pretty rare compared to the forms of how it does it for nowadays for DVD, ROMs, or just anything else to be more specific. Mind you, it's been a very long while since I actually explained some of this stuff, so because of that, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that, relatively speaking, if you couldn't tell from the plot already, that we're now going to be taking care of the forms of the main threat, which appears to be known as Elizabeth Barclay, which as a result about the fact that we need to stop her from able to resurrecting Count Dracula. So because of that, although the entire main villain of the forms of the Castlevania game like this is still pretty much Dracula, similar to the forms of how it does it on the previous games, but as you can tell, the actual structure of the game itself plays a little bit more differently this time around. Although you're still able to actually go from point A to point B, and as you can tell, as I mentioned this before, there's no time limits to be found, so we don't need to worry about getting a time over or anything else like that if you spend it on the level for too long. And as a result, the actual world themes this time around though is going to take place entirely in Europe. So as a result about the fact that I think the first level we're going to be diving right into is the actual parts of the Castlevania itself. Likely also it does manage to take place in some sort of a particular country, which as a result it was like Romana, I think is what it says anyway. And then eventually, whenever we get to stage 2, that it does manage to take place in a different region. And I believe, relatively speaking though, is about the fact that, man, these guys really aren't usually kidding around. Just what they managed to able to go up with what the actual travel was. I mean, I'm just only asking. So because of that, yeah, as I said before, ultimately though, you're able to only experience to go into 6 stages in the game, just like the original Castlevania. But, however though, they are incredibly long, and it has been filled to the brim with a lot of challenges and enemy encounters. So because of that, yeah, for the Mega Drive game, or the Genesis game more like, the game is actually pretty cool to look at, even though it does have some pretty cool little sprite animations. That's what they're going for here. I'm guessing about the fact that it almost entirely makes up for entirely 3D kind of like vibes to it though, likely also for one of those bosses coming up. But either way though, let's go and take care of the forms of this particular Spirit Guard right here. I'm not exactly sure what that boss's name was though, but I'm sure enough though, I'm thinking I was able to discuss that until tomorrow, whenever I decide to do the second playthrough with the forms of Eric Lucard. So, but then again though, I was expecting to be able to actually tackle for more Castlevania stuff, but as I said before, this will be the last one for now, for 2023, because as a result, it's about the fact that, well, today's date, of course, is the 27th of October today, in some cases in 2023 today, so, yeah, I'll explain more details about that particular topic until for later, because now we're going to be going to Atlantis Shrine in Greece, so, yeah, I think something tells me it's about the fact that I believe I've heard about the Greece country before, especially that Sonic did somehow tell me something, that once in a while is about the fact that I think that was back in 2016 if I recall, is that Sonic did somehow tell me about the fact that he did somehow experience Greece before, alongside with Mario and Mega Man and Pac-Man for their holiday vacation. So as a result, that was around that time when Knuckles did somehow told me about the fact that we did somehow give Sonic the special celebration birthday gift, which as a result, it was his 25th anniversary back in 2016, if I recall, and we did somehow receive Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games on the Wii U, despite the fact that every once in a while that none of those players seems able to actually touch upon that game nowadays, especially because they still pretty much used to with the forms of the older games a lot more, just because of how fun they are. For the sake of the forms of back in Beijing 2008, all the way up to London 2012, and maybe a decent time for the likes of Tokyo 2020, or if I like to say Tokyo 2021, but that's just how it is for the most part. So because of that, well, every once in a while though is about the fact that we do need to able to climb onto staircases, and luckily though, I'll explain more details about that as soon as we get to the third stage. So because of that, yeah, unfortunately though, there's one thing that John Morris or Eric Lacard didn't learn from the Bill mods, predictably Simon from Super Castlevania 4, it was control. We're back to the original controls in this game, folks, so that means a stiff jump, no mid-air controls, and knockback. So that's gonna happen for quite some time, especially concerning for the fact that if we get to the hardest levels in the game, there might be a lot of times about the fact that we will come across into a lot of knockback and stuff like that, which always feels a bit somewhat inconsistent, but regardless of such though, I have no idea why they did somehow manage to able to well, I'll explain more about it as soon as we're able to actually take care of this mini fight route here, so that should be all good. Oh, and by the way, something's worth noting for, I'm actually going to be playing for this entire game on expert mode, if you want to know what that particular thing is about to be all about. Well, because the reason being for this is because I did somehow manage to practice this game on my own time for a bit, and mind you, I'm still playing this on the Anniversary Collection for Castlevania compilation on my glorious Nintendo Switch, of course. So as a result, no matter what though, I did somehow manage to able to play the game on my own time for a bit, playing Bloodlines, and as a result, I did somehow manage to able to unlock expert mode, because when you start the game off, you're able to have only choose like 2 different difficulties, which are easy and normal. So relatively speaking though, if you beat the game on normal mode, you actually have a chance to able to actually unlock expert mode, which the latter with the forms of how difficult this game can be, which as a result, no matter what though, it's nowhere near as hard as Castlevania 3 in my opinion. Although, keep this in mind though, is about the fact that in this game you do actually have a limited amount of continues. If you use it all up, and it's back to the beginning of the game for you. Although, it does still utilize the password feature, so as a result, no matter what though, is about the fact that I'll explain more about the forms of the password system and during it later down the road. So yeah, you probably get the idea of how this particular thing's process goes. So anyway, like I said before, it's about the fact that today's date, of course, there is the 27th of October today, in some cases in 2023 today. I almost assume about the fact that we can pretty much dive right into this game and join at some point in this weekend, but as a result, we actually did slightly push it forward a little, but that's because recently about the fact, you remember how the fact that Luigi has already explained about this, ever since in Luigi's Mansion playthrough so far? Unfortunately though, the continuation parts of Luigi's Mansion needs to be delayed specifically until Sunday, mainly because no matter what though, we are pretty much slow for the sake of the forms of the uploading schedules alike. I know it takes a bit of time, especially concerning for the fact that how much endless amount of edited stuff that we need to deal with. I mean, relatively speaking, though, is about the fact that we blame on the forms of the actual gigabyte RAM storage problem. But even then, no, we're still pretty much okay enough as it goes by. But it's just about no matter what, though, we've been busy doing other things, you know. Especially concerning for the fact that by that time, next week is going to be WarioWare Move It games release. So because of that, still I'm very excited about this. And I'm pretty sure we've only got about 3 more weeks left until Super Mario RPG Remake is going to be on its way. So because of that, still I'm pretty pumped about the forms of the final 2 Nintendo Switch games after all, and relatively speaking though, it's generally about no matter what though, it's a good thing I did somehow skip over certain Switch game releases during that time, which are Detective Pikachu release, because as a result, or specifically Detective Pikachu Returns, well, that's just mainly because I just don't feel like trying to able to actually buy the game, I have to be quite frank. So, although it's interesting, but it's just that it's not my cup of tea. So because of that, yeah, I think I should probably give that game a pass. So, also I just realized I've already managed to get, let's just say, 5 lives so far, or technically 6, if you expect about the fact that with 0, still counts as 1 chance left. Well, that's because I did somehow manage to able to obtain a 1-up during the forms of the last segment in Stage 1. Well, that's just mainly because no matter what though, it's about the fact that you can't able to actually adjust how many lives you want to bring. So as a result, you can able to actually set by default as in like 3 lives, but you can able to actually adjust up to 5 lives to make things a little bit more easier, just like the forms of how it does it on any other Mega Drive games in the past. So, which I could probably name a few, but I sort of able to actually do not pay attention to the forms of certain game selections for the Mega Drive stuff. So, anyways, let's go downstairs, and as a result, we're going to be face off against with the next boss, but we have to wait until when the water level starts lower enough, so now we can able to take on the next fight. So, okay, something worth noting for is that the more you try to able to actually keep on leveling up your whip upgrade, or the actual spear for Eric Lacard, basically you can able to actually do a devastating attack with it. Like, as a result, it became a lot more stronger, and as a result, you can able to actually increase more attack power. But here's one downside though: if you do get hit by any other enemies or hazards or anything else like that, if you get hit just once, you lose your 4th upgrade. I mean, what is this, like a Castlevania adventure? Oh wait, we haven't got to that game yet, until specifically next year, mind you, for its next Halloween session. But either way though, it looks like we're about to able to almost dish him out, and there he goes. Again, I apologize for my commentary is a little bit slightly awkward at this point. Well, that's just mainly because we're trying to able to actually get our pace going for the uploading schedules alike. But then again though, as far as what Luigi has already addressed something, is that hopefully until November, we should be back on track for more uploading schedules in a nice steady pace, including 2024. So, also I just realized is that until next year, Castlevania Bloodlines will expect it to become 30 years old until next year, so that seems kind of interesting. Anyway, so now we're done with the second stage, and now we're going to be hit on to the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy. So, yeah, it seems kind of weird about the fact that after playing through on my own time when it comes to experiencing Grand Canal board in Mario Party 7, that usually that board does manage to take place in Italy. So, as a result, we're now going to be ended up in the forms of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So, yeah, it seems pretty cool though. And also we have to watch out for those birds with their spears. And something's worth noting for is about the fact that there's one little factor about this game it does like to able to incorporate on, and that's the gore factor. Like, as a result, you know what I mean with the forms of slaughtering stuff, which as a result, yeah, if I somehow manage to able to, yeah, that bird just got slaughtered. I mean, dang, that is gruesome, you know? Especially concerning for the fact that no wonder why that Castlevania A New Generation did manage to able to censor this particular stuff. Mind you, I've never actually played the European version of this particular game. That's just because I'm pretty much used to with the forms of the gore factor for the Bloodlines game. So, although luckily we can still able to jump on stairs, and surprisingly enough, we can actually jump while on stairs this time, so at the very least we do have that. Well, relatively speaking of it, but no matter what though, that you can able to actually do just that, just like in Super Castlevania 4 and stuff like that. Although, relatively speaking of, I just have no idea why they managed to able to have some new additions for, well, let's just say, in this particular path right here, that as you can see, just like the forms of how it does it on Super Castlevania 4, is that John Morris can able to actually utilize the whip onto specific ceilings, and you can able to actually swing back and forth until you're able to actually reach certain gaps of the bottomless pit, as you can tell from this particular segment. So because of that, yeah, I've always have no idea why they managed able to have some new additions and took away others. I mean, I have no complaints about the forms of the Castlevania 4's control, or Super Castlevania 4 controls, because obviously no matter what though, they get the actual control momentum feels a lot more fluid. Oh, and by the way, something's worth noting for, the more you keep on collecting certain gems, basically though, you can able to actually put up with the enhanced version of certain sub-weapons. Although, I rarely use the forms of the enhanced attacks, but it's all good, all things considered. Even though that, mind you, has been about quite a few days ago, since we've actually last played certain related, or something related to Castlevania stuff. Because mind you, no matter what though, Luigi's actually getting very, very, very close to finishing up Luigi's Mansion before we move on to, let's just say, some more continuation uploading schedules for the likes of Sonic Frontiers, and maybe eventually at some point for the next couple of Let's Plays left. So, I mean, relatively speaking though, time will tell, but either way, let's just go ahead and climb onto this particular tilted leaning tower, which I will say, for the graphics like this, does look pretty impressive for the time. And also, I really love the soundtrack in this game so far. It sounds a little bit more energetic and all that stuff, because it was obviously released on the Mega Drive / Sega Genesis. Now, of course, we need to be able to try to dodge those Medusa heads, and also there's a lot of bats and mummies, and there goes my first death. Although luckily though, just like in Super Castlevania 4, the checkpoints are still very generous, unlike in Castlevania 3, that basically does that the checkpoints obviously do manage to become a little bit more active every time whenever you move on to the next part of the level. So at the very least that's that. So, and of course the actual hot roast still makes its return after the events of, you know, the past Castlevania games. Well, the only time exception being is of course Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, because in order to be able to heal up is that you need to go to certain churches, so that's one thing to consider. So, but anyway though, something's worth noting for as well is that recently, by that time in Journey Forms of today's case, had the 6-year anniversary of the game's release of Super Mario Odyssey for the Nintendo Switch, and while looking back on it now, it still looks pretty much an incredible game in my opinion. I mean, it's almost perfect, but nowhere near as like extreme 100 or anything else like that, because there are a couple of times though where basically I just really wish if paid DLC exists. But we do get some bit of DLC, like free DLC updates, but it's just only for one mode, which is of course Luigi's Balloon World, which I found was a little bit disappointing while looking back, but for its time though, especially concerning for the fact that we were originally expected that playable Luigi might also become a thing, but it's now up to the forms of certain modding and stuff like that, which I suppose that's okay for me, but it's just that I just really wish if we were able to play some multitude of playable characters ever since in Super Mario 3D World, and especially noticeable with, of course, Super Mario 3D Land, Super Mario Galaxy, and Super Mario Galaxy 2, because I'm pretty much used to that particular kind of stuff, although, technically speaking though, I'm gonna be alright without it, so because of that, yeah, it's been 6 years ago since Super Mario Odyssey first came out on the Nintendo Switch, and I still managed to able to love it even today. So even then though, it's kind of hard for me to able to go back into that game now, mainly because I've been playing some other Switch games recently, like, you know, like Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and eventually Super Mario RPG once that game comes out, and eventually also with WarioWare Move It, but even then though, that's saying something I suppose, so. Alright, here we go with this next boss fight right here. I think this one appears to be by the forms of Gargoyle, if I recall correctly. Well, mind you about the fact that I did not exactly know certain boss names for that regard. I'm sure they'll mention that in Journey Forms of the credit sequence, luckily, but obviously this fight is a little bit tricky, but that's mainly because of one element, and that's what appears to be this little spinning arena, which as a result, yeah, it makes it a little bit tricky to able to make a complete standstill if you try to able to take on the forms of Gargoyle right here. But if you do enough hits on him though, and then luckily the last phase is actually pretty easy, because all you have to do is just try to able to dodge him, and that's all you have to really do for this point. So, and there we go, stage 3 is concluded. So, oh, and something's worth noting for as well is that, yes, we did somehow finally manage to able to get the rest of the DLC stuff for the likes of Sonic Superstars, not only on the Switch version, but also on the PS4 version, which I believe something tells me is that, spoiler alert for those of you who want to know what's going to be coming up, obviously much like Sonic Frontiers, Sonic Colors Ultimate, I think relatively speaking though, we'll play the PS4 version for the sake of the Let's Play department, if I was assuming so anyway, so. Anyway, so let's go ahead and go on to the factory level, and it does manage to able to take place in German, so, or Germany to be more specific. So, I think something tells me this level theme does kind of reminds me of the clock tower level from the past Castlevania games, except Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, because obviously you're going into the forms of the overworld kind of stuff. In addition to that, though, is about the fact that you have to do a lot of backtracking here and there. So because of that, yeah, it looks like we're about able to explore the actual factory. So yeah, it seems kind of interesting with all these level themes alike. So yeah, that's as far as I can talk about in terms of the forms of Castlevania Bloodlines, or Castlevania A New Generation in the European version, or the Vampire Killer on the Japanese version. So that's something is usually as far as I'm concerned. Oh, and another thing is worth noting for is that certain breakable walls are now visible this time around. So as a result, you can definitely tell what's going to be hiding on those specific breakable walls. So it's kind of similar to the forms of how it does it from The Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past, including Link's Awakening for the Game Boy or Game Boy Color for the DX version. So yeah, relatively speaking though, it's a shame we can't seem to able to do the Switch remake of Link's Awakening, sadly, for this year, because that will be able to make the actual thing a lot more interesting, concerning for the fact that Link's Awakening on the Game Boy did somehow came out 30 years ago, so even then though, that's usually a sight to behold. So, but anyway, let's just go ahead and take care of this. Oh, jeez. Yeah, we also need to watch out for those conveyor belts as well, including those pistons, as you can tell from the right side of the screen. So, now of course, kind of think about it though, this level also does remind me of something related to the forms of the factory world from the likes of Donkey Kong Country Returns, believe it or not, except the fact that we have to deal with the forms of stiff controls and all that. So, but I mean, relatively speaking, this particular part is not too bad. So I think, relatively speaking, though, is about the fact that once we get towards the very end of the game, though, it'll make things a little bit more tricky, especially noticeable with certain platforming alike, and maybe in addition with the forms of certain enemies do respawn from time to time. So of course, about the fact that we'll just have to check on here. I don't think there's anything else in here besides the fact that what's the point of coming onto that specific spot in the first place. I mean, relatively speaking, though, no matter what, though, like I said before, is that this game does have limited amount of continues. Likely also, I think you can only use up for about 2 continues to be more specific. So if you use them all up, and it's back to the beginning of the game for you. So because of that, I know there's actually a password feature that does allow you to have able to have unlimited amount of continues, but I think it's going to be a bit of a pain to set up. So because of that, unlike the forms of how it does it on the past games, ranging from Castlevania 1, 2, 3, and 4, obviously you do have unlimited amount of continues. And I apologize for that particular door noise in the background. I think my guess is that Silver did somehow manage to able to go into a loo recently, so even then though, or perhaps even maybe, he's probably going to be able to actually just have his bath, because, I don't suppose you've noticed, but I believe both me, Mighty, as well as Sonic, Shadow, and Silver, basically we are going to be all set for able to actually prepare to go to the Lion King Theater, which as a result, I'm actually really looking forward to this though. I've heard a lot of things about it, especially concerning I keep on hearing about it from the likes of not only certain TV adverts, but also on radio stations and all that stuff. And apparently a lot of people seem to really enjoy the Lion King on the theater, which as a result, I'm really looking forward to that kind of stuff. Oh, and talking of which though, we actually meet again with the Frankenstein monster, except now he does manage to able to offering for himself a lot of moves this time around, which can be ranging from this very deadly whip attack, in addition to that with this hand smack zap thing, as we just did earlier, and even especially noticeable with this other attack I was going to be on about, but either way, I did somehow die from that particular very dangerous sword cockwheel, which as a result, if you dare touch the forms of the sword blade, as you can tell, it deals so many damage on you. So because of that, no wonder why we're going to be going for the entire game on expert mode, just to ensure, because relatively speaking though, if you beat the game on easy mode, it just gets like a very short ending, and then if you beat the game on normal mode, basically though, the ending it goes by a little bit longer, but since I'm going to be playing on expert mode, we are able to actually see the true ending, which not only we can deal with it once for the likes of John Morris, but also twice for the sake of the forms of Eric Lucard, just to show you guys some different variety when it comes to certain characters alike. So, yeah, kind of like how we did from the likes of the forms of certain Sonic games, which is, to be more specifically, Sonic Heroes and also Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, alongside with the forms of Sonic 3 and Knuckles and all that stuff. So yeah, you pretty much already know what to expect. So, and also, I'm a little bit nerve-wracked almost, especially concerning for the fact that I've almost gonna get myself an annoying knockback from the likes of the forms of those godforsaken skeletons. But relatively speaking though, I think we should be okay for the most part. It's just about the fact, no matter what though, timing is key, just like the forms of how it does in the previous games. But I think we're basically almost done with this level, believe it or not. So because of that, yeah, let's just go ahead and go from here and try to duck just in case I don't want to get another death from that particular segment. And it looks like we're about to take care of those very weird gears as enemies. So I believe I'm about to die here. Yep, I somehow did. But that's okay though, because obviously if you get a game over at one point, not only do you waste one of your continues, but it's also about the fact that you can able to continue where you left off in one of those stages you died at. So at the very least that's that. So now remember back then is about the fact that back in Journey forms within the early 2010s era, that this game never gets re-released until 2019 exists, where basically they finally get a chance to play not only Castlevania Bloodlines for the likes of the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, but also with the forms within the Mega Drive or Genesis Mini for the likes of the also in 2019 as well. And I think the reason why there's a good thing we somehow got the Mega Drive Mini in the first place, just for the sake of able to experience Castlevania Bloodlines for the first time, as well as Mega Man The Wily Wars as well, which we've already known about it ever since in Journey forms of back in last year that we've already done Castlevania, no wait, Mega Man The Wily Wars, Journey forms of Mega Man Marathon 2. So anyways, here's the forms of this very weird boss that we need to take down, which as a result, I will admit though, is very well animated, which it kind of reminds me like the forms of one of those sprite animations you find during the course of Infector Man 1, but also Infector Man 2 as well. Although, kind of thinking about it though, I'm pretty certain about the fact that Infector Man 1 did somehow came out in, I would say, in 1995, if I recall. Mind you, this game did came out before Infector Man 1, as well as Infector Man 2, because I'm pretty sure Infector Man 2 came out in 1996, so yeah, it's quite revolutionary during that time with all this new sprite animations to somehow manage to come in. Especially noticeable how weird they look, and on top of that, no matter what though, it almost gets like a 3D vibe to it though. So anyways though, so let's move on to the palace, which does manage to take place in France. So I think something tells me the final level is going to take place in England. So yeah, pretty interesting all things considered of how the fact of how this game's structure plays out to be. So oh, and also another thing too is about the fact that recently today, Mario Party 3 has finally get its release on the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pack. So I'm sure, oh, my controls have been reversed. Oh yeah, something tells me with those things that if you dare touch those little sprinkly dust stuff, basically though, your controls will be reversed. So for instance, if I hold down right, it takes me to the left, and if I hold down left, obviously it takes me to the right. So as a result, it only lasted for about a few seconds, so yeah, it doesn't bother me at all because I'm more accustomed to that, especially concerning after the events of certain other games as far as I did somehow used to play back then, but ultimately speaking though, I seem to somehow managed able to lost track so far. So anyways though, as I was saying, Mario Party 3 has finally come to its release on the forms of the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pack ever since, well, today. So I'm sure that most Mario Party fans out there will finally get a chance to play Mario Party 3 an online experience. Although keep this in mind, you still need to unlock certain stuff, mainly during the forms of those boards, which are backtrack, although some people don't usually care about the dual modes that much. But as a result, if you really want to go for an ultimate true experience, well, obviously you got to go for the entire single-player story mode first until you're able to actually experience Waluigi's Island. Or some people have already done that already, thanks to the forms of a lot of emphasis on save states. And in fact, kind of think about it, if you really want to go for the ultimate challenge, likely also if you want to beat the actual entire story mode on hard mode, well, obviously if you have if you have certain struggles with the forms of certain hardest aspects about Mario Party 3, likely also on the dual mode system. Basically though, if you keep screwing up with the forms of certain dice rolls, then luckily the save state is here for you. So, at least assuming if you really want to go after these S ranks as well, if you much more of a desire, and especially noticeable, it really helps in journey forms of Game Guy mode, but if you're trying to able to unlock Mario's Puzzle Party Pro, then obviously if you have certain struggles with the forms of gambling, if you really want to reach 1,000 coins for that particular only one singular run, well, luckily you can able to actually utilize the save states here and there. So, oh god, there's a lot of filled to the brim with those little bone pillars. But potentially speaking, once we do keep on crouching and just trying to use the sub-weapons occasionally, and then we should be alright. So, yeah, I think we're gonna be able to continue things on here. Now, I believe for this particular path right there, we can't usually go upwards, because something tells me we do need Eric a card for the likes of the forms we're trying to go up there, because there was actually a pretty cool special ability that you can able to actually utilize with as Eric, but let's just say we'll save that particular topic until tomorrow, like I said before. So, also something tells me we need to avoid those bombs. That's what this guy keeps on tossing at. But regardless of such though, it's about, I'm pretty sure there are a few rare occasions that he might able to actually toss the actual, oh, thank you very much. That will definitely come in handy, especially noticeable I'm almost low on health. But regardless of such though, I think it's actually a pretty cool reward from my recollection. So, anyway, so let's go up to this little continuous spiral staircase up here, so we can potentially try to make our way to certain floors, while trying to deal with those bone pillars or boneheads or anything else like that. So we can potentially to just keep jumping and hope for the best. So, and I believe something tells me from up there, that's what appears to be an alternative pathway. I'm guessing that could be only for Eric Lucard. So, that could be the reason for it. So either way, let's just go ahead and just go to the next room. Although, I just need to make sure I need to double check. So, I think that should be all good. So, because I'm really hoping about the fact that we can probably find the pot roast around here, but it doesn't look like it. So either way, let's go ahead and take care of this next fight right here. So I think this guy might actually be kind of easy to deal with as well. So even then, no, I'm pretty sure certain bosses can go down a little bit faster than I was hoping for, assuming of course I don't lose my 4th upgrade for the sake of the forms of not only for its whip, but also eventually for its spear. So because of that, yeah, let's go ahead and almost, yeah, he's pretty much down. So alright, I think for the most part it's about the fact that we've almost done with this point. So because of that, I'm not kidding why I'm saying this. It's about the fact that the game itself is actually going to get pretty shorter. So much likely for the fact that the levels themselves might be a little bit lengthy and long. But as a result, we can pretty much guarantee about the fact that we're pretty much finishing up the first playthrough already. So because of that, despite the fact that we've already done the halfway point in terms of the main game, of course. So, but relatively speaking though, about the fact that I'm pretty sure much like in Castlevania 3, this particular uploading schedule took a little bit longer than I was expecting, especially concerning for the fact that, well, you guys should all know. But anyway, there's also another topic I want to address something about this as well, is that despite it's gonna be rumored for the sake of time, is that apparently though, we might able to actually get some more DLC for Sonic Superstars, and maybe potentially it's about the fact that, well, despite the fact that I still don't trust rumors and leaks and stuff like that, as you probably already know, but relatively speaking though, they might able to actually release a yet another Sonic game until specifically next holiday. So because of that, oh jeez, look how much devastating that particular attack plays out to be. Especially concerning that, like I said before, the more gems we keep on collecting, then obviously we can able to actually unleash this very devastating enhanced attack immediately. So either way, I think something tells me we need to deal with the amount of damage to the pillar, so just to ensure about the fact that we can able to actually move along. So even that note, and much like the forms of how it does it on Castlevania 1, Castlevania 3, alongside with the forms of Super Castlevania 4, that if you defeat certain bosses by the end of the stage, you obviously obtain the glorious red orb. So, as we expected, so nothing new from here. So, except the noticeable differences being is that this is on the, well, the Sega system, which as a result, for a while now is about the fact that usually for Castlevania games always managed to take place on the Nintendo consoles, but in 1994, Sega has finally managed able to give Castlevania a shot with the forms of Castlevania Bloodlines. So, yeah, that seems pretty cool and interesting throughout for its system's release during that specific time period. So, anyways, here we go with this next fight right here, and I think, relatively speaking, though, we need to keep on attacking her until she became a Mothra. Okay, I'm not exactly sure she changes into a moth, but either way though, or a Mothra more like. And it's definitely a little bit tricky though, just because of the fact that no matter what though, assuming of course if you keep on utilizing your whip, then you should be okay. So even then though, it's just about the fact that he flies in midair and I'm almost going to be dying, so hopefully that should finish her off. So there it goes. And that was a definition of a close call, because if I die into this fight, luckily though I did somehow respawn into the beginning portion of stage 5-8, so even then though, stage 5 is completed. So yeah, it doesn't take that long kind of thinking about it, despite having to deal with the amount of like tricky platforming here and there, especially concerning for the fact that with these falling chandeliers and all that stuff. But hey, at least on the upside is though, we finally make our way to the final stage in the game, which appears to be Buddy Forms at the castle in England. So, not exactly sure what that specific level name is called though. That's just mainly because I'm not great at spelling. So because of that, into the final stage we go. So because of that, yeah, what quite of a journey this can be. So because of that, of course we need to able to try to dodge certain Medusa heads, and now they somehow managed able to shoot projectiles at us for some particular reason. And of course the bridge is about to collapse, so I think relatively speaking though is about the fact that out of all the actual levels in Castlevania Bloodlines, this particular level is specifically is my least favorite, because I know about the fact that the last level will be the hardest, because as you can tell, for some unexplained reason your vision is very distorted. You can make it very just fine as long as you pay attention to your feet, but thanks to those gosh darn Medusa heads is that you might as well get knocked back by these guys and you will die at least once. So, but regardless of such though, if you're careful enough, then you should be okay for the most part with this particular stage. But luckily though, we managed able to obtain the mirror, which causes a screen nuke. And oh, really? Anti-gravity in my platform in Castlevania? Oh god, I hate stuff like this. I hate it in Sonic, and I especially hate it here. But at least potentially speaking, this is only one segment for the sake of time. So because of that, although if I want to keep my upgraded whip, that means I cannot afford able to actually get hit once. So, but unfortunately though, I did somehow took a hit. So because of that, it's not that great of a deal, but regardless of such though, at least we still got ourselves the holy water, so we can potentially try to able to utilize the enhanced version of that particular attack, so we can able to actually decimate certain enemy encounters alike. But yeah, with all that being said though, like I said before, that now that Mario Party 3 has already been taken care of for the likes of the bombs of the N64 games lineup for the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pack, obviously we've only got one left currently, which appears to be 1080 Snowboarding, and as far as we predicted that, it's going to be releasing sometime in winter for either at the end of 2023 or even the beginning of 2024, regardless of the forms of maybe they'll try to add some more titles for the likes of next year and onwards. So because of that, time will tell, especially because we now expecting to be waiting for the first ever Nintendo Direct for the likes of in 2024. So because of that, usually it's going to take place in sometime in February as to be expected. So Anyway, so here we are onto the staircase once again, and it looks like something tells me is about the fact that we might able to come across into that familiar face, which as a result, it appears to be Death himself. Although, the only noticeable difference is this time around though, is that you don't fight him straight away, but rather, as you can tell, he did somehow bring out certain cards, which as a result, some of them can take you to the rematch incarnations of certain boss fights as we've already fought against ever since the regular stages, and there are several cards that does manage able to bring certain attacks to Death himself. So because of that, well, mind you, Death is the only one who's going to attack us. So, but relatively speaking though, sometimes he can be a bit of an endurance run, basically. So because of that though, both of those or the majority of the bosses encounters for the likes of the rematch incarnations, they basically behave exactly the same as before. Although the noticeable difference has been is that, as you can tell, I'm almost low on health. But here's the thing though, is that if you ever played this particular stage on normal mode, there's actually another card that does give you some abundance of pot roast, which that will come in handy if you almost about to die. So because of that, I believe something tells me if you do die on this fight, this means you have to do the entire boss rush again. So because of that, keep this in mind. So it looks like one of his attacks is now going to be coming present. So even then, we can able to actually expect able to deal with all those cards and all that stuff. Now I believe if you do manage to able to deal with all of those cards, basically though, you can now able to have the ability to able to actually now attack Death. So yeah, let's just go ahead and just take care of the number 5 cards and stuff like that, and for the most part we can now able to actually take care of the last 2 remaining bosses. The only boss exception to this though, when it comes to dealing with boss rematch incarnations, which appears to be on the first stage in addition with the 5th stage. So not exactly sure why they somehow managed to only choose certain bosses based off from stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. Maybe because he finds certain bosses a bit interesting, to say the least. So at the very least though, he's almost down, so yeah, and I think there goes the forms of this weird gear monster. I do know it does have its name, by the way, but we'll find out in the credit sequence, so I can assure you for this point. So anyway, one of the subjects when it comes to the forms of something Mario related is that I'm happy to report is that the English version of the physical version of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe plus Booster Course Pass is expected to be happening. So because of that, not exactly sure when that's going to be releasing exactly, but I'm sure we'll be able to find out some more details about that until God knows if about the fact no matter what though, we pretty much almost done when it comes to Mario content for 2023. Like, all it needs left now is, of course, Super Mario RPG Remake, and of course, WarioWare Move It, and lastly, Wave 6 for the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. So, but we still have no idea when that's going to be releasing exactly, but I'm sure we'll find out more details about that until, presumably speaking, until next month or something. So anyway, once we deal with all of those cards, as you can tell, we can now deal with the forms of Death himself, and he's no problem. So because of that, assuming of course about the fact that you can able to upgrade your whip, and as a result, he's easily being defeated. So if you think we're basically done here, well, as it turns out, we still got more segments to go. So because of that, after all, about the fact no matter what though, there's no way we can able to actually heal up anytime soon, especially concerning that we've only got 2 units of health left, although I'm also able to take another death, especially concerning for the fact that, as you can tell, we've now met up with Elizabeth Barley. So because of that, from the start though, is that she actually turns into a Medusa. So because of that, obviously we know exactly how to deal with her. The only time is a little bit tricky though, is the timing of that particular tail attack that she did manage able to pull off. But that's okay, because we got a checkpoint in during the forms of stage 6-7, but then eventually we've now made our way to back onto stage 8, stage 6-8. So yeah, I do apologize for my commentary. Like I said before, it feels a little bit awkward, but that's mainly because that's as far as I can able to talk about in terms of Castlevania Bloodlines, aka Vampire Killer for the Japanese version, or Castlevania A New Generation. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below for the question of the day. Have you ever experienced Castlevania Bloodlines before? Well, like I said before, is about the fact that I've never actually experienced the original cartridge version of Castlevania A New Generation or Castlevania Bloodlines, because like I said before, getting the physical cartridge nowadays is actually going to get ridiculously expensive. But regardless of such though, is about the fact that, at least I will admit though, this game is actually really good so far. Especially it's way up there than the forms of how it does on the well, not as a great game compared to the forms of how it does it on Super Castlevania 4, obviously, because obviously with that particular controller is the main factor, so yeah, but at the very least though, it's about the fact that the graphics look super dang good. Well, I'll explain more details about my final thoughts of Castlevania Bloodlines whenever we decide to do the second playthrough for the likes of the forms of whenever we play as the second playable character. So, and I do know right from the start though is about the fact I apologize for that particular graphical limitations, as you can tell, because she was supposed to be able to actually teleport while the actual the sprites of her will get flickered, but I honestly have no idea why it just keeps on doing like that. Maybe because of emulation or something? Well, mind you, I'm playing this on the forms of, like I said before, the Castlevania Anniversary Collection compilation, because that was the only method I'm going to be playing Castlevania Bloodlines, because there was no way for me to get the cartridge version of the game after all, so anyway, back onto the boss fight against with the forms of Elizabeth Bodley. Now, we've already taken care of the forms of the Medusa form of Elizabeth Bodley, or anything else like that. So, as a result, the Medusa segment is actually pretty easy, especially concerning if you pretty much know what to do when it comes to dodging her attacks, then you should be all good to go. But now we're on to the second phase, where basically we need to attack her as quickly as we can, because if we take long enough, she will able to actually use those specific spirit orbs in order able to attack me. So because of that, if you don't attack her at all, then obviously she'll start summoning those specific orbs to able to attack you. So yeah, relatively an easy fight. The best strategy for this is to keep your distance away from Elizabeth Bodley, because obviously if you get slightly closer to her, she'll obviously teleport into an opposite way. So because of that, stand slightly to the right, and then you should be able to actually just go ahead and deal with her in a certain amount of time. So because of that, yeah, relatively an easy fight if you pretty much know what to do, despite the fact that with this particular sprite, doesn't exactly go like, you know, teleporting or anything else like that, so I was pretty much expecting. But either way though, again, I apologize if my comment take is a little bit slightly awkward, mainly because, again, with this very slow uploading schedules at this point recently once again, because sometimes though about the fact that I feel like 2023 feels like a mixed bag year for me, much like the forms of how it does it from last year in 2022, but a little bit slightly different in terms of structure or something. So either way, so with all that being said, we've pretty much taken care of the forms of Elizabeth Bodley, so now we can able to take on the final boss in Castlevania Bloodlines, which is none other than Dracula himself once again. And as a result, similar to the forms of how he does it on the previous encounters with Dracula, that, well, to be more specifically though, is about the fact that ever since in Castlevania 3, that basically we have to go for 3 segments. So because of that, the first segment is actually pretty easy, assuming of course about the fact that you need to time your jumps well enough and then able to actually utilize the whip or the spear for Eric. So as a result, you can able to deal some bit of damage to Dracula, so you should be okay enough. But until when it gets to the point after we're done with the first part, obviously about the fact that, like I said before, that ever since in Castlevania 3 that he turns into 2 different forms. So, or to be more specifically though, that we've done with the first phase, so now we're going to be moving on to the second phase, which as a result, luckily the entire battle wasn't all that hard, but these forms are just weird as heck. Like, this second form was this wizard thing, and as soon as we get the forms of the third and final phase, basically he'll turn into this very weird demon monster. So as a result, yeah, as soon as you're able to deal enough hits on him though, we're now on to the third and final phase of the fight. So because of that, relatively speaking though, it's actually a super duper easy fight, at least if you know what to do for this point. Especially noticeable, you need to be super steady with your jumping momentum. But regardless of everything else though, it's about the fact that, yeah, he looks like a demon monster. As long as you weren't able to actually keep on hitting him, like as you saw, like I've almost, like, cornered him and stuff like that. but as you can tell, we're now on to the red counterpart of Dracula's third form, where basically we have to avoid that particular fire-breathing attack from his groin, apparently. But we're now on to the third and the final phase of the forms of his third form. But actually, kind of think about it, he's actually way easier to deal with. So, yeah, as soon as you're able to deal enough hits on him though, despite the fact that you need to avoid certain bones if you keep on hitting him, and as a result, Castlevania Bloodlines has finally been concluded. Well, assuming of course we need to obtain the 6th and final orb, of course. So, yeah, that was it basically. That was it for the likes of John Morris's playthrough for the likes of Castlevania Bloodlines. So, as a result, technically speaking, we're now on to the halfway point in terms of the forms of Castlevania Bloodlines. So because of that, surprisingly enough, I actually had a lot of fun with this game so far. Although, mind you, I will get to my final thoughts of this entire game until for later, for the sake of the forms of tomorrow. So because of that, now if you managed able to beat the game on expert mode, you get yourselves even longer ending. But if you beat the game on easy mode, you get yourselves a shorter ending. And if you beat the game on normal mode, obviously you only get that specific brief text saying that the resurrection of Dracula has been averted. And then afterwards though, with this particular next scene, it did say, however, the blood of the vampire hunters still courses through his veins. So, yeah, that's essentially how the ending plays out to be if you beat the game as, you know, John Morris. So, either way, that was it basically. That was it for the likes of Castlevania Bloodlines. I'm very surprised that the entire length itself is actually a lot shorter than I was expecting. Well, I almost assume about the fact that it follows the exactly same length as the forms of how it does it for certain parts of Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, despite the fact that I will say that Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse is by far the longest Castlevania games we've ever done so far. Well, it wasn't until when it gets to the point until Rondo of Blood or Symphony of the Night, or even other GBA games as a matter of fact, it'll go a little bit longer, including Dracula X or Vampire Kiss for those of you who lived in Europe. So, yeah, I've honestly have no idea why. That also, for the sake of the forms of Castlevania Dracula X, that game was also very expensive if you decide to buy the game on the cartridge version or something like that. So maybe because it's rare or something? I have no idea. Well, mind you, with regards to everything else though, is about the fact that, again, I'll explain my final thoughts of the forms of Castlevania Bloodlines until whenever we finish up the second playthrough as Eric Lucard. So because of that, just to show you guys what the forms of how Eric plays out to be. So, but I'm sure he does have some different movesets compared to the forms of how he does it for John Morris, to be more specifically. Because I know for a fact that John Morris plays pretty much exactly like the forms of how he does it for not only Simon Bilmart, but also Trevor Bilmart as well, aka Ralph in Japan, which I have no idea why they have changed the name for the sake of Trevor from the Japanese version to Ralph. So, but either way, I think suffice to say that's as far as we can able to explain any of this specific stuff though. Mind you, on this credit sequence, it did show us each and every single boss's names, by the way, so just want to classify that for the actual boss roll call. In fact, kind of think about it though, it does kind of reminds me of the forms of the enemy roll call staff credits thing from the likes of Donkey Kong Country. In fact, kind of think about it, this game also came out the same year as Donkey Kong Country, believe it or not. So, yeah, with that being said though, I think we should probably end things off this point right here. So join me next time for more Let's Play of Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Mega Drive / Sega Genesis. It's that we're about able to play the entire game again, except now we're going to be playing as Eric Lucard. So, I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later, fellas.